Alright, today we are going to be moving on to tutorial number 2 for our Spooky Nights by Simple Stories 6.5 by 8.5 mini album. So stay tuned! Hey and howdy everyone! Welcome back to my channel. It's Jeannie with Paper Pixie Ink, and today we are diving into our second tutorial for our Spooky Nights mini album. So to get started, my first page is going to be a pretty basic page, but with some pretty decent real estate for 4x6 photos. So in order to create this page, I first chose a base pattern page to put on the front, and then once I had decided on that, and I kept the pattern very, very simplistic because the majority of it is going to be covered up by this accordion kind of style pull-out set of photo mats. So in order to create those mats, I cut 2 pieces of black cardstock to 6.5 by 9.5, and then I scored each of those on the long side at 1/2 inch and 5 inches, so that when you fold them, you get 2 sets, I guess, of mats that end up being 6.5 by 4.5, and you'll see why I chose that side in a minute. But once you have those 2 pieces cut, you're going to cut one more at 6.5 by 4.5. And then to create the accordion piece, you're going to attach the 1/2 inch tabs to the edge of the other one, and then you're going to attach your final 6.5 by 4.5 piece to your second tab. And then you can open this like a fan style or accordion style, and then we're going to cut a piece of black glitter cardstock or some other form of backing that you'd want to use, like a coordinating color solid cardstock or another pattern paper, or really anything that you can create a secondary mat with, just to give it a little bit more dimension and color. So you can also skip this entirely if you want. And once you have that piece cut to 6.25 by 4.25, we are going to adhere down our 6 by 8 pattern paper to the front of our page. And then we are going to mat on the front of the accordion piece that we've put together the black glitter cardstock or whatever it is that you've chosen. And then on top of that, we are going to take the 4x6 cut apart piece that we chose from the collection and use that as the top cover for that. Once we have that put together, we are going to go ahead and cut 8 pieces of a coordinating cardstock. I chose like a lime green color that matched with the green that was in the collection, and I cut 8 pieces to 6.25 by 4.25. I did stamp them with a photo stamp. You don't need to do that, but I give most of my albums away, and so I want people to understand that these are perfect photo mats to put your photos in. So we're going to go ahead and adhere one of each of those to all of the blank spaces within your accordion, except for the very back of it, because the very back of your accordion piece is actually going to get adhered down to the center of your base page. so now that we have all of our photo mats in and everything else adhered, I am going to use about 30 inches of a black satin ribbon to create a closure for this. So I'm just going to put some double-sided adhesive on the back at the top because I don't really want to cover up the picture or the words or anything from the tag on the front. So I'm just going to put it on the top and apply the ribbon to it, and then I'll tie it in a bow, and that will hold it closed when you're flipping the pages open and, going through the pages of the album. And then I'm going to go ahead and adhere this whole piece to the front of my first page. Alright, so now that we have our first page done, we're going to flip it over and do the back side of that. This page is going to be very, very simple, but we're going to put quite a bit in it. So we're going to start with a base pocket page. To create this, we are going to use a piece of cardstock that is cut to 2 3/4 by 7 1/4. And we're going to score it at 1/2 inch and then 6 3/4 inches so that we can create 2 side flaps. And then we're going to score it at the 1/2 inch mark long ways so that we create the bottom pocket part. Now, I did use a paper punch to create the edge. I just used I think it was a Martha Stewart punch that is like a picket fence look. I thought it kind of went with the vibe of the album well, but you can use whatever you want or nothing at all. Again, it's entirely up to you. And I just kind of lined mine up in the center, eyeballing it, and punched towards both sides. Alright, so now that I have my pocket ready, I need to choose some pattern paper that will fit on this. Now, because of the way that this is designed, you can use one 6x8 sheet of paper to cover both the page and the pocket itself, because you don't really need pattern paper underneath where the pocket is. Nobody's going to see that anyway, and it just creates an additional bulk. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to find a piece of pattern paper that will work for this, and I'm going to see if I can't find one that has the other side of the paper will coordinate very well with it so that I don't have to cut 2 pieces. I can only cut one. Saves paper, makes it easier for you. Win-win. And then once you find your pattern paper, you are going to cut 1.5 inches off the bottom of it for your pocket page. If you have additional paper, or you decide that you want to, use your paper in a different way, you can just cut 1.5 inches off of any of your pattern paper, or, a coordinating solid cardstock if you would prefer. So moving on to the front of our second page, we're going to keep it pretty simple, but we're going to give it some extra space. And so to do this, we are going to create a page flap that is the same size as the page. So we are going to cut a piece of black cardstock to 6 3/4 by 8 1/4, and then we're going to score along the long edge at 1/2 inch so that when we fold that over, we end up with a page that is 6 1/4 by 8 1/4. let's go ahead and choose some pattern paper that will match the opposite page. And then we're going to go ahead and glue down the flap to our base page. Now that I have my flap attached to my base page, I am going to go ahead and grab a couple of magnets and use those as a closure so that when you're flipping through the pages in your album, this page will remain closed unless you open it. And then I'm going to go ahead and adhere down my 3 sheets of pattern paper that I chose for this page. Alright, so moving on to the back of the second page, we're going to kind of create this in the same image as the back of the first page, except for instead of doing a pocket page that is horizontal on the bottom, we're going to create one vertically on the right side of the page. So to do this, we're going to need a piece of black cardstock that is cut to 9 1/4 by 3 inches, and then you're going to score that on the short edge at 1/2 inch and 8 3/4 inches, and then along the long edge you're going to score it at 1/2 inch so that you can fold all 3 of those sides in to create your pocket. And then we're going to punch along the edge of it using the same picket fence punch that we used on the first one. Again, you can skip this step. You could use a different punch. If you're using a different paper collection, you know, maybe a Christmas one, you could maybe use an ornament one, or I think I've seen snowflake ones. Or you could use, you know, something that isn't necessarily related, like a simple scallop, or again, you could just leave it plain. And then once you have your pocket created, we're going to choose a piece of pattern paper. And this time what I did was I chose one piece. I cut it on the long edge at 1 3/4 inches. So I ended up with a piece that was 4 1/4 by 8 inches, and then the matching piece that was 1 3/4 inches by 8 inches. And then this way I didn't have to cut duplicate pieces of paper. I didn't really want to. I was trying to get the best use out of this collection that I could without any kind of waste. So let's go ahead and get that done. Alright, so the front of our third page is going to be very similar to the front of our second page, except this time we're going to do a top flap instead of a side flap. So to create this page, we're going to need to cut a piece of cardstock to 8 3/4 by 6 1/4, and then we're going to score along the short edge at 1/2 inch so that when you fold that over, you're going to end up with the same page size as all the others at 8 1/4 by 6 1/4. So let's go ahead and do that, and then pick out some pattern paper to cover our pages. And then in order to hold this page closed like we did for the front of the second page, I'm going to use another set of magnets on this one as well. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and do something a little out of order. I want to make sure that I get my inside front and back covers done without running out of any of my pattern paper. So I'm going to go ahead and work on the inside front cover, and I chose a piece of pattern paper. I'm going to do a waterfall. I'm going to go ahead and cut a piece of black shimmer paper that I have. This is also from Recollections, and I'm going to cut that piece to 8 1/4 by 6 1/4, and then I can lay a piece of my pattern paper that is already at 8 by 6. So to create my waterfall, I am going to cut 4 pieces of my black cardstock to 6 by 4. And then I'm going to score each of those along the short edge at 5.5 inches so that I end up with waterfall pieces that are 5.5 by 4. And then I'm also going to cut a piece of black cardstock to 4 by 5.5 inches, which will be my last piece that will be attached to my base. Also, for this, I'm going to cut a piece of black glitter cardstock to 3 3/4 by 5 1/4. And this is going to be on my top one because I'm going to use one of my journaling cut apart pieces in order to finish my top piece. And then I'm also going to cut 4 pieces of my photomat colored cardstock in the lime green to 3 3/4 by 5 1/4, and those will go on the front of each of my other waterfall pages. Now, once I have my waterfall pieces scored and folded over, I'm going to use just a scrap piece of black cardstock that I have to lay them all down and glue them down together so that I can make sure that they're all lined up. You can do this directly onto your page. I do it occasionally, but I'm always afraid that I'm going to mess something up. And so I like to do it on a scrap piece first so that I can make sure it's all lined up properly. And if I do screw up, then I can fix it. Whereas it's a lot harder to fix if you've already glued it directly down to your page. So I'm going to go ahead and glue them all down, make sure they're all lined up properly, and then we'll continue. So the next piece that I'm going to work on is creating the little closure for my waterfall. And to do that, I'm just going to take a piece of scrap cardstock that is 7 inches by 2 inches, and I'm just going to punch the picket fence on both sides, and I'm going to make sure that I line up the fencing so that it is equal on each side so that they're perfectly aligned. And then I'll go ahead and score at 1.5 inches. I won't punch the bottom edge, and I will attach that 1.5 inch portion to the bottom underside of my waterfall, and then I'll use a magnet to create the closure. So I'll put one on the inside of the picket fence punched cardstock, and then I'll put one on the front of my waterfall before I glue down my front pieces. go ahead and cut a piece of glitter cardstock for our closure. So I'm going to cut this to 3/4 of an inch by 4 7/8 of an inch so that I cover just the middle part between the picket fence areas. And I'm going to cut 2 pieces for this, one for the front and one for the back. So the last piece is to figure out how I want to finish off this waterfall feature and then glue it all together. In the end, I just chose one of the ephemera pieces from the collection to just kind of top the closure so that the seam, if you will, wasn't really showing. So now that we have our waterfall feature put together, I'm going to use my shimmer cardstock that I cut earlier. And again, that was cut to 8 1/4 by 6 1/4. And I'm going to glue that down, and then I'm going to glue my pattern paper down on top of that. And then my waterfall feature will be centered on top of that. Alright, so now we're going to move on to the back of page 3. And this one is pretty simple, but really kind of fun. It's a little different. So to start, we're going to cut 2 pieces of black cardstock, and we're going to cut those to 6 by 4, and then we're going to score them at 3 inches. And then we're also going to cut 4 pieces of the green photo mat cardstock that I've been using to 2 3/4 by 3 3/4. That's going to go on the inside. And then we're going to take 2 of the little 3 by 4 cut aparts, and we're going to cut those to 2 3/4 by 3 3/4, and those are going to be our toppers. And we're also going to use 2 sets of magnets so that we can hold those little photo mat cards closed. So let's go ahead and get all those cut. We're also going to choose a matching piece of the pattern paper to kind of back everything. So because I chose little ghost cut aparts, I chose the little ghost paper to kind of match. So let's go ahead and get all of those cut. Alright, so let's go ahead and get all of this put together. First, we're going to take our backing piece of pattern paper and just glue it down to our base page. And then we're going to go ahead and glue down our cut aparts to the tops of our little photo mat cards. And then before we can go ahead and put our lime green photo mats on the inside of these cards, we're going to go ahead and attach our magnets. Okay, so in order to attach these so that we can slip our little tags inside them, we are going to just put a very small amount of liquid adhesive on the top and bottom of the back of these cards and then place them down. So moving on to the front of our 4th page, we're going to keep this very, very simple, and we're just going to take a piece of pattern paper and cover it, and then we're going to put a couple of corner pockets, small ones, in the top right and the bottom left corners so that it can hold a large photo mat that can hold a few photos. So in order to make my little corner pockets, I just took a piece of scrap cardstock that I had that was 2 3/4 inches wide, and I cut it to be a square at 2 3/4 by 2 3/4, and then I cut it on a diagonal straight across. So I got these 2 little triangles, and then I just scored on the 2 flat sides so that I could create my little pockets. All right, so now that we have the front of the 4th page done, it's time to move on to the back of the 4th page. Now, I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do something different than what I had already done in my album, but I wasn't really sure what that was going to be. And so I decided to take a moment and place all the pages that I had completed into my album. So let's go ahead and glue all of our pages in. All right, so that is the end of tutorial number 2. I'm still going to work on figuring out what I want to do for the back of the 4th page, so stay tuned for that. We'll also be decorating the album and placing extra photo mats and whatnot within it, so that should be coming out within the next couple of days, so stay tuned for that, and thanks so much for watching. And remember, if you are interested in seeing more, don't forget to click on that subscribe button. Thanks, everyone.